A few months ago, a friend and fellow trophy hunter decided to revisit a survival horror game that we had both been interested in since its release in 2022, called Signalis. We had both been intrigued by its PlayStation 1 style graphics and survival horror gameplay, but, as often happens with smaller titles, it got swept aside by bigger games that were released, and Signalis got pushed down the list of things to play. When my friend went back to the game to get the Platinum Trophy for himself, he fell in love with it, and recommended it to me heavily with the promise that the game was so good that he watched a 2-hour video essay going through all of its narrative influences and references. Now, I'm a sucker for games with capital L lore in them, and I decided to follow his recommendation, so the next time the game went on sale I picked it up. I needed a palate cleanser after I finished the epic that was Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so I decided to load up Signalis, and it didn't take long before I was sure this was going to be my 247th Platinum Trophy. So, clear out your inventory pouch, grab your pistol, and let's solve the puzzle of what it's like to earn the Platinum Trophy in Signalis. In Signalis, you play as Elster, a replica unit that wakes up on a ship that appears to have crash-landed on a remote planet. There is no sign of a Gestalt officer, so you leave the ship, eventually finding a strange deep hole in the ground. Against all common sense, Elster enters the hole and finds herself in a strange small radio station with a copy of Robert Chambers' famous novel, The King in Yellow, sitting on a desk in front of her. You pick it up, and things get weird momentarily before Elster wakes up standing in front of a mirror in a bathroom. From here, she finds herself searching a mining facility on the planet Leng for a woman that she has a photograph of. But standing between Elster and her goal are a horde of corrupted replicas driven insane by a strange virus. The narrative that follows this is beautiful and tragic, and I'm not going to say anything more specific than that because I feel like the twists are too important to spoil, and the story, at least for me, was the best part of the game. What I can say is this though. The story is intricately woven, but it is told in quite a roundabout fashion. The narrative is experienced in the same way that you talk about a dream you had, but you can't quite remember. Half concrete memory, half vague recollection, but all covered by a haze, and it leaves you wondering what it all means in the end. For some people, I think this could probably be an issue. Some people like more straightforward stories with digestible plots, but if you like the idea of a story that leaves a lot of its interpretation up to you, then I would highly recommend this one. Much like the friend who recommended it to me, I spent the next hour after I finished Signalis for the first time looking up discussions and theories online, and I watched his recommended 2-hour video essay, and there are still parts of the story that I'm trying to wrap my head around. Signalis has multiple endings too, and it's well worth seeing them all, as they have a great impact on how you interpret the journey that you've been through. While the actual plot of the game can sometimes be vague and interpretable, the way Signalis builds the world around it though is much clearer. Like any good survival horror, you can pick up tons of little notes that you carry around with you. Some are tutorials on new weapons or how to use healing items amongst other things, but for the most part, the notes are world building and story related. Each of them does an incredible job of building up the world and setting of the game piece by piece, while also providing little hints and nudges for both the mysteries of the narrative and the puzzles that the game will ask you to complete. This world building comes not only from reading, but from the aesthetic that the game has. Its retro-futuristic setting that evokes imagery of Soviet Russia or Nazi Germany really highlight the nature of the repressive, totalitarian regime that the characters live in. The abandoned mining facility that you explore, with its dark, oppressive hallways, full of cramped and winding spaces, mirrors the narrative and creates an unnerving and tense atmosphere. The stellar soundtrack completes this, filling the space with dark and intense music as you explore. Hell, even the sound effect that plays when you try and save the game is anxiety-inducing. This feeling never lets up. As you push deeper and deeper into the nightmarish facility, you begin to encounter the terrifying mutations of other replicas driven mad by the virus. Some are passive, standing in dark corners, gently shaking to themselves and easily avoided, but others are much more aggressive, patrolling rooms and searching for a poor replica to take their fury out on. All of these poor souls share one thing in common though. All of them are just waiting to unleash their blood-curdling scream when they spot you, before they bull rush towards you in an attempt to maul you to death. The enemies are great, especially the bosses, having varied yet horrific designs and requiring different tactics to deal with. The simple fodder enemies of Yules are easy to avoid and easy to shoot, but the more aggressive star units with their shields or the incredibly cool Calibri enemies require different tactics and more thought to take out. Terrifyingly, Signalis has also taken influence from the Crimson Heads from the Resident Evil remake, where enemies that you have defeated have a chance of coming back to life randomly later on, unless you burn them with thermite or a flare gun. These resources are obviously limited, so you're constantly wondering if it's worth burning the enemies that you've defeated to safeguard your route if you need to come back here, or leave them and hope that you don't have to come in this room too often. When the enemies are dead, though, and unburned, their corpses seem to vibrate softly on the ground, and it's incredibly creepy, but it also means that you never know if the movement is them getting up or just twitching as you walk past them. I do wish there were more bosses in the game, though. There are only 3 of them, although considering that my first playthrough of Signalis only took around 6.5 hours, maybe any more bosses would have felt like too much in such a short period of time, especially on the harder difficulty when you have fewer resources available to you. This does lead me to my only real gripe with Signalis, its combat. It's not awful, it just could be much better. I found it to be a little janky, especially with the aiming. You press the left trigger of your controller to enter your aiming stance and then use the right stick to aim. As you target an enemy, a small square will appear, and if you hold that for a few seconds, the square will get smaller, and the shot you make will be a precision shot and will do a bit of extra damage. This is another influence that the game has taken from the Resident Evil remakes, and I think that it's a great idea. But what I struggled with was sometimes the reticule would just disappear, even if I wasn't moving or the enemy wasn't obstructed, so I'd have to move, reset my aim and try again. It wasn't game-breaking, and it only happened enough times to be a small annoyance, but it did lead me to trying to avoid combat wherever possible, for fear of losing my aim at a critical moment and taking more hits than I needed to. Thankfully, combat can be avoided fairly often, with there being enough space to kite enemies or sneak past them in most rooms to get to your goals. And this helps save resources for the fights that you do need, which is something the game has learned, again, from one of its major inspirations, Resident Evil. Like Resident Evil, you have a very limited inventory, except in this case it's only 6 spaces, but there are safe rooms with storage boxes that you can use to mitigate this. This does encourage backtracking, or at least some difficult decisions if you are far from a safe room. If you don't have the room for a key puzzle item, do leave it here and come back later when you have more space, but potentially have to deal with resurrected enemies, or do you throw away the healing items or ammo that you don't need right at this moment, but who knows how many enemies you'll come across between here and the next safe room. This choice is something that you'll be faced with often as well, as the game loves to always just have just a few more things than you can carry in between safe rooms. Knowing what items to carry and when is also important, as Signalis is filled with puzzles that need specific items to use on them. As someone who loves puzzles, I was never disappointed in the game's variety of brain teasers. The puzzles here range from really simple ones like opening a safe by reading a document in a different room that has the code helpfully written down on it, to much more complex ones like riddle solving or using radio signals to reveal keypad codes for locked rooms dotted around the map. I found almost all of the puzzles to be incredibly enjoyable to work out, and none of them were frustrating or so difficult that it took me out of the game. One of the items that I thought was really cool was the eidetic eye module. This is an equipable item that lets you take a photo of something in the game, which can be incredibly helpful for remembering puzzle hints when the actual puzzle is really far away. However, as I was playing on PlayStation, it was far easier just to use the screenshot function or take a note on my phone, so I didn't actually use it that much. However, the fact that the puzzles needed me to take notes or screenshots at all is a positive in my book, as it meant the puzzles weren't too simple to solve. In contrast to some of the more complex puzzles though, earning the Platinum Trophy, Achtung, is a simple affair. There are only 2 missable trophies, and these are for getting the 2 additional but powerful weapons. One is in the first area and requires finding the revolver for the Einhorn Trophy. This is pretty simple. You just need to explore the area after the first boss pretty thoroughly, find the hunter's key, and use it on the gun case in the shooting range. The second weapon is the rifle, which will give you the Nitro Trophy. For this, you'll need to wait till you've beaten the second boss, and then as you're exploring you'll find a small bottle that you can use to wake up an unconscious person that's in one of the safe rooms. Finding the small bottle does require a little bit of backtracking, as there will be a door that will appear in a room that wasn't there before. It's in a room where you found a large wooden doll, if you can remember where that is. Once you use the bottle on the person, they will give you the rifle. There is also a trophy for dying once that's called Schwerher Ausnahmefehler, and for dying 16 times, which is called Locher. Lastly, there is Überleben, which is for beating the game on survival difficulty with classic inventory rules. This run took me an extra 4-5 hours in total. You can attempt this from the start if you really want to, but as with most games, I feel it's better to do a normal run first before throwing yourself into a difficult challenge. The remaining 7 trophies are all story related and unmissable. Despite the game having multiple endings, it doesn't actually matter which one you get. Signalis does a lot of things incredibly well. Its Silent Hill inspired story, combined with its Resident Evil inspired gameplay, made for a brilliant, if melancholy and scary experience that I would highly recommend to anyone who even has a passing interest in these types of games. It's a beautiful game, in both its message and its retro style graphics, and I love the way that it tells its story, peeling back layers of meaning as you complete it, leaving you with so much to think about after you've finished. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that it's given you a good idea of what awaits you in Signalis. If you did enjoy, please consider subscribing and leave a comment below about your thoughts on the game or others in the genre. And until next time, happy hunting.